Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War news update for the 24th of August 2023, first part thereof. It is Ukraine's Independence Day, so here is Zelensky saying, Happy Ukraine's Independence Day, the day of the free, the strong, and the dignified, the day of equals, Ukrainian men and women in our entire country. In this fight, everyone counts because the fight is for something that is important to everyone, an independent Ukraine. So that is Mr. Zelensky there saying his piece. Talking about peace, I am wearing a Country of Peace t-shirt. So if you want to support a good charity that is helping in Ukraine, check out Country of Peace, countryofpeace.com. Valeria I've interviewed her, so you can go and check that interview out, one of my lives. Go to my channel page, click on the live and check out the interview I've had with her. Somewhere here. Oh, it might, unless it was on my Atypling Philosopher. It might be back on my Atypling Philosopher. I'll go and find the link for that. But you can check out previous lives I have had on this channel. And also you can check out the playlist that has some decent videos I think that are worth watching. So if you check out that playlist, I added one the other day about deep state maps and how that is compiled. But yeah, go and check out the playlists. And also check out last night's live on Yevgeny Prigozhin and the update I did there, because I think that would give you some idea of what my thoughts are, although they're pretty confused, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. Right, let's move on to where we normally start. So Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. I can't find the usual infographic that tells me that info, but I'll use this other one from the Kyiv Independent. It's the same info, so it doesn't really matter. But for those who want consistency, right, 340 KIA. That is definitely the lowest number we have seen for some time. However, on the other hand, large numbers of vehicles and equipment have still been taken out. So 23 APVs is huge. That's a big number of things like infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, mine resistant ambush protection vehicles, that kind of stuff. So 23 to be lost means there's another day of heavy equipment loss. 2 tanks, that is very low, but there have been complaints from Russian sources that they are running low on tanks. And this is something I've been saying myself for some time, that they must be getting to the point where they have fewer tanks. And as we've seen, I will go through in the extra today the Dell's Excel spreadsheet that tracks the data over time and see if indeed tank losses have been dipping. My conclusion sometime back was that there are just fewer tanks to be hit. 28 vehicles in general, so fuel tanks and vehicles and whatnot. That is another massive loss for the Russians in one day, and that signifies a really big hit on logistics that we are seeing consistently. 15 pieces of artillery, another bad day, although slightly lower than we have seen, but still, I mean, if you're losing 15 pieces of artillery every day, you are going to be suffering somewhat. The question is, how many pieces do they have to to bring to bear from reserves? How able are they to repair equipment? And that's the same for all equipment, but let's wonder about artillery. So when they are losing pieces or pieces get damaged, is it easy for the Russians to repair them? Don't forget as well that artillery will be suffering, particularly at the rate that Russia has been using over the course of the war. That artillery will be degrading just in general from usage and a lack of probably decent maintenance. The barrels will wear down, the boring on the barrels, and that will cause a lack of accuracy, but then barrels will also explode if they are not properly maintained or replaced. And the Russians will be needing to replace an awful lot of barrels, as well as losing artillery to strikes from the Ukrainians. Anyway, to continue, 1 multiple launch rocket system, 20 drones. What else? 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. That is a big loss, and we're going to talk about that in a second. They have lost some really high value pieces of equipment in that category. Ukrainians, interestingly, have lost some as well. One piece of special equipment, that's the lowest we've seen for some time. That could be anything from, as you can see there, excavators, diggers, and whatnot, to demining equipment. I presume things like Brem, uh, engineering vehicles and whatnot will be included in that, but it could also be electronic warfare, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, so on and so forth. This is Andrew Perpetua's list from last night. That he's a mapper that I rely on. He tots up what he sees with on the video feeds, on Telegram feeds, and Twitter and whatnot, and uh, tots these up into his own database. It gives us an interesting snapshot. The Russians are losing slightly more, but there's some pretty interesting losses for the Ukrainians. Let's go to the Russians. They've lost a plane. That's obviously Prigozhin's plane. He's added that in there. Helicopters captured helicopter. We're going to talk about that in a second. Air defense. So this is S-400 complex. It looks like two components of that. That is what I was talking about yesterday. There were claims that the entire battery was taken out, but obviously if there isn't video evidence of all parts of those of the battery being taken out, then you can only conclude with what you can see. And then other bits and pieces, trucks, infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, and whatnot. Now, the Ukrainians down here have lost two radar components, which is a bad loss. One of them is part of an S-300 missile that was hit by an X-35, KH-35 missile. That included a launcher as well. So that is a really big loss to lose an S-300. These are really high-value air defense systems. And then some other bits and pieces. Here, interestingly, it says a boat damaged, Ukrainian speedboat targeted, unclear if it is hit. And we'll come on to that in a second because I don't know exactly. That could be on the Dnipro River, but it could possibly be one near the oil rig. And he says unclear if it's hit. If that is the one there, the Ukrainians have claimed it wasn't hit. Okay. So that one piece of special equipment could be a Brem 1 repair vehicle. So if we go back to here, that piece of special equipment, and then we also have in the air defense, anti-aircraft warfare. Here we have a Tunguska air defense system there. There's footage of both of those being taken out from IEDs, from drones. So then we come on to this story that I was speaking to my mate yesterday, saying, "Oh," he said, "Oh yeah, we talked about this helicopter that had been captured by the Ukrainians." He gave one account, and I was like, "No, it landed because it had got lost due to electronic warfare, and its systems navigation was poor, and it lost, and then they captured it." He was like, "Oh, okay." And actually, I was wrong, right, but wrong. There are two accounts of what happened to this helicopter. One is a Russian account, which is covering up what really happened. Okay, so the Russian account, fighter bomber that's a Russian Air Force based Telegram channel, tells a story about a Russian Mi-8 helicopter that got lost and apparently landed on a Ukrainian airfield in Poltava a few weeks back. Once they tried to take off again, they were shot. So the Russian account is that it got lost, navigation was gone, could be from electronic warfare, and it landed at Poltava, and then it realized it's the wrong place, tried to take off again, and they shot the crew, and that was the end of that. Ukrainians captured a helicopter. But then, another version of the story then came out that made a lot more sense. And then, it people are like, "Oh, it seems like this was a cover story that the Russians are trying to spread there." So what actually happened? Well, Ukrainska Pravda obtained photos of the Russian military Mi-8 helicopter that landed at Poltava airfield in Kharkiv Oblast a couple of weeks ago. Citing sources, they stated it was a result of a long-term special operation of the main Directorate of Intelligence, HUR. The Ukrainian intelligence reportedly lured the Mi-8 pilot into Ukraine. In their words, the helicopter made a flight between two air bases and transported parts of Su-27 and Su-30 SM fighter jets. It was already transferred to Kiev. Now, so the helicopter was not only useful for being captured, but it also would have had quite important spare parts for jets that the Russians use, obviously, but the Ukrainians use too, and they would really need. So it's quite a high value haul. Well, okay. Reports of the Russian Mi-8 helicopter landing in Poltava This comes from Butazov. So, this is a first deliberate surrender of such equipment of the Russian Federation to Ukraine. The story promises to become legendary. The Russian combat helicopter, together with the entire crew, flew to Ukraine and surrendered to the armed forces. This was reported by a Russian propaganda channel. The Russians report that the reason for the flight was navigational errors, but without a doubt, this is another Russian lie. After all, the helicopter flew to the Poltava airfield. As a Russian blogger reported, then it is located approximately 300 kilometers from the front line. You're not going to fly 300 kilometers by mistake, even if you're, over the front lines, even if you do have navigational errors or electronic warfare issues. Uh, yeah, it seems unlikely. And the Russians could only land there knowingly as a result of a well prepared flight. The helicopter flies at a low altitude, at a low speed, and the crew can clearly see all ground landmarks. It is simply impossible to make a mistake by 300 kilometers. This is a large consumption of fuel. There can be no accidents. If everything was as if the Russians wrote it, then it was possible that the first conscious surrender of a Russian combat helicopter took place in history. This is just a sensation that demoralizes Putin's military aviation elite. We're waiting for details from Ukrainian sources, so on and so forth. Now, from what I can gather, one version of the story, the pilot of the helicopter purposefully crossed the border to surrender and hand over the equipment. It's also reported that his family was taken to Ukraine in advance. It's also known that the helicopter may have had spare parts for Su-30 airplanes on board. The Russian side does not officially confirm this information. However, the military media close to the Russian Air Force say that there was a navigation area and the pilot got lost. So, from what I can gather here, the pilot took the helicopter on purpose to Poltava, landed it. The crew weren't aware of this kind of surrendering and didn't want to surrender. And I don't know whether they tried to take off again, but the rest of the crew was shot, as is one version of the story, and seems fairly plausible. So the pilot was the one that surrendered. It had been known in advance. His family had been safeguarded, and uh, then then he took the helicopter with important kit over to Poltava, and the crew were eliminated. So that is a really big loss for the Russians there. Intelligence chief says that Russia has 27 operable Tu-22 M3 bombers left after airbase strikes. So we saw one was destroyed the other day. They've lost at least one of these, which apparently leaves 27 Following recent strikes against Russian military air bases, the Russians currently operate 27 serviceable ones of these. Now, if I was Budanov, if I was the Ukrainians, I would be targeting those air bases continually, as they are actually, and the Russians have to move their airframes further and further back. This is a really big success for the Ukrainians, but I would be hammering these as much as possible. Uh, even if you can take out one here and one there, that's absolutely fantastic. Really high value targets there. So it'll be interesting to see what the Ukrainians do with regard to strikes on further Russian air bases. Now, I didn't quite know what category to put this under. This is basically a video all on its own. This is like a breaking news video, in my opinion, but we'll include it here. So let's give you the bit of the foundations to this. First of all, we saw yesterday a strike on the S-400 system at the edge of Crimea. So if you remember, I showed you parts of this video where an S-400 battery, apparently the entire battery and the entire crew were taken out. And I was like, I don't know if the entire battery was destroyed, but we know that certainly parts of it were destroyed from the video that we have had access to. Now, what was important here is that the drone that you can see, is obviously, well, you can't see it. It is taking the video imagery of this strike, was able to get above this peninsula here at the edge of Crimea to take out the S-400. Okay, the day before, I reported that two drones, and I think reporting from Ukraine reported this, two drones were shot down over this area of Crimea. And I said to you exactly this, that what normally happens when you have single drones doing stuff like that is they are trying to find out, they're kind of sacrificial. They're trying to find out where the air defense systems are so that you have then a strike the next day. So those two drones that came in over the Black Sea here, doglegged it towards Crimea, were then taken out. And exactly that, what happened the next day is the S-400 battery was blown up here. But apparently not only that, now these are claims from the Ukrainians, and I don't have confirmation of these claims from Humaniuk here, but if this is true, this is massively significant. So yesterday, I already said that the S-400, the Triumph anti-aircraft missile complex battery being taken out was so important. It's massively high value. It's the best air defense system they have, really, and to lose many components of that, perhaps all of it, and the trained crew is hugely significant. But also, it means that Crimea is now not protected by air defense, particularly in this area. I mean, the range of that is going to be something like this, right? So suddenly they've lost that range, okay? And that means, and I said yesterday, things are going to happen in Crimea now. The Crimea is now weaker from in terms of air defense. Now, Humaniuk said 3 more Russian S-300 launchers were destroyed or damaged in Kherson. Okay, that is significant. Now, I presume she's meaning yesterday or or at least recently. Okay, why is that really significant? Well, let's go back to that map because this then takes out air defense here, which now means you don't have, I presume, decent long range quality Russian air defenses in this whole region. So instead of doglegging it, you can perhaps, do things like this, go straight across Kherson, or be able to have close air support for your troops getting across the Dnipro River, but also you're going to have stuff happening in Crimea. Well, what has happened since? Right, first thing, yesterday, Defense Forces hit an enemy plane in the Black Sea. MDI, Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, has stated a collision between, that doesn't mean collision, that means an interaction between a Russian military aircraft and Ukrainian warships took place near Zminy Island. So this is Snake Island. A missile fired from a Ukrainian warship damaged a Russian plane, which was forced to immediately leave the scene and fly in the direction of the nearest airfield. Okay, so where did this take place? Well, I'm not exactly sure. You can see Snake Island there. I'm not exactly sure where the oil rig is, but I think it might be somewhere around here. So we have relatively close to Crimea activity by Ukrainian naval military forces, and we have a Russian fighter plane that went to take out some of these boats and was itself hit by a manpad and apparently had to limp back to the air base. So that has at least been damaged as far as we can tell. Now the Russians claim they took out a boat here, and this is going back then to the hits and losses. Andrew Perpetua saying Ukrainian speedboat targeted, unclear if it's hit. I don't know if it's talking about this, may not be, but it may be. So the claims are the Russians claim they took a boat out. The Ukrainians flatly deny that and said it didn't happen. Ukrainian military personnel targeted a Russian Su-30M fighter jet with manpads on a US-made boat off Snake Island. Now, these boats apparently had anti-ship missiles on board, anti-air missiles, and it could be these missiles from these boats, like harpoons possibly, I don't know. The Russians claimed yesterday that the S-400 was taken out by a harpoon or similar missile in that area. So it could be that they were fired not from the land over here, but from these boats firing a missile into it onto the Crimean Peninsula on the west there. So that's really significant. They had a number of different, weapons on board these boats. So there was that. Then here we have just another claim about this. Ukraine MOD denies Russian claims that Russian Su-30 destroyed a US-made Ukrainian Willard Sea Force high-speed military boat in the east of Snake Island. Instead, Ukraine claims that a Russian missile fell into the water while trying to hit the boat. And this is why, people are unsure as to exactly what happened. Two claims, both pretty contradictory, but it certainly appears that, well, the crew of the boat then fired upon the Russian Su-30 with manpads. The Russian jet was reportedly damaged. It was forced to immediately leave the area and fly in the direction of the nearest airfield. Ukrainian point of view, Su-30 trying to hit US-made Ukrainian Willard High Sea Force high-speed military boat in the area of the Snake Island. So there's various footage of that. I'll link that in the description, but go and check it out. So okay, that happened. Then there is this. This is from this morning, Right, this morning, Ukrainian forces conducted a raid at Cape Tarkhan, so exactly where the S-400 was, pretty much, in the Crimea. It was part of the joint special operation, and the main director of intelligence in Ukrainian Navy, HUR, spokesperson Andriy Yusov, has informed. Russian media outlet Shots reported that sounds of gunfire heard in the air were heard in the area earlier this morning. Now, if you remember, Budanov said months and months ago that we will have troops in Crimea uh, before the end of the summer. And do you know what? You might have expected that to be all about invasion from the north, but actually, he's come true on his claims. Like as of this morning, Ukrainian troops. Oh look, I've got shivers. I've got goosebumps. Ukrainian troops have landed on Crimea and conducted a mission that was, by all accounts, successful, and they didn't lose anyone according to the Ukrainians. So, Ukrainian special forces today landed in Crimea as part of an operation. According to the Ukrainians, all tasks within the framework of the special operation were completed. By the way, this is the same Cape where the S-400 was destroyed yesterday. Russians say 10 Ukrainian saboteurs landed and opened fire. Okay. And then uh, landing in Crimea, part of the special operation. There were no losses among the Ukrainian personnel. Apparently, the special operation continues. All the details are not disclosed. There are losses among the personnel of the enemy, as well as among the forces and means. Uh, Information on the losses are being clarified. This is really, really significant. Um, so, according to the Ukrainians, the goal was achieved and there were no casualties among the personnel. This is Andrei Yusov. From 5 a.m., explosions were heard near the village of Mayak on Cape Tarkankut. In addition, the sources of Crimea, Reali in Ukrainian intelligence confirmed that a battle involving boats and aircraft took place in the area. That's possibly what took place the day before. It might be to do with that operation as well. I don't know. Mayak is home to the base of the 3rd Radio Regiment of the Russian Aerospace Forces Radio Engineering Troops. Also in the Tarkankut Peninsula is a radar node, the Nebo M radar, and the Castor 2E2 radar. Air defense positions have been prepared along the perimeter. So now things are starting to add up really quite a lot. You have the situation where the S-400 has been taken out, where you have possibly S-300s being taken out in Kherson, and then radar installations being targeted possibly in this attack on the peninsula. We know those targets are there. Is that what the objective for those special forces were? This is really significant. You are shaping this area for further activities. This won't, of course, won't be the end of it. This isn't the end. This is a means to an end, and this allows Ukrainian air forces to operate, I would imagine, closer to Crimea, but probably more importantly, it will allow drones and missiles to get through, with the greater impunity than previously. Then we have good old Budanov saying we have the ability to hit any part of temporarily occupied Crimea as of now. We can reach the enemy at absolutely any point. Those who have done stupid things, it's better for them to leave, he says. And then he actually goes on to say, those who are going to stay, get ready to help. And with, I think it was something like either with letting us know where things are with reconnaissance or to help the troops. So that's really significant. Now, talking about help, the Crimean Tatars are generally anti-Russian for lots of historical reasons. An NGO says that Russia conducts raids at Crimean Tatars' homes. Russian security services conducted searches at the homes of Crimean Tatars in the Bakhchisyarai district in this morning. The Crimean Solidarity Human Rights Organization reported. So stuff is happening. Crimea is a bit of a hotbed of activity right now. This is somewhere to watch over the next week for sure. What I wonder is whether there will be some significant hits on Sevastopol now, or whether they're going to hit other targets, other bases, whether there will be any other landings for Ukrainian forces, or whether the Russians will now be onto that much more. But I think Sevastopol. It'll be really interesting to see if the naval port of Sevastopol suddenly becomes a much much greater target for the Ukrainians, and we start seeing, I don't know, storm shadows hitting ships moored in the port. I don't know. That's obviously me speculating, but this is, I think, a hugely significant uh, set of events. And when I was talking, and please go and check, if you check out yesterday's videos, I did loads of videos yesterday. Sorry for those that don't like too much content. But one of my videos, I'm really interested, if you haven't already seen it, please watch it. I'm interested in your feedback on whether the counteroffensive has failed or not. So I did a whole video, like an hour-long video, on whether it is a failed counteroffensive, looking at different sort of media sources. I don't think it is, and I actually get a sense that the net is closing in some really meaningful ways. I think logistics is being hammered. I think air defenses are starting to be hammered. Now, if you look at what's happened with regard to Crimea, this is a really big issue. Now, if the Russians are unable to do things like that, where are the Russian Spetsnaz and special forces? Where are the Russians clinically striking places like this? Well, we don't always hear about that. So I'm sure the Russians do succeed in certain things. Like there have been some high value air defense systems being hit recently by the Russians. So it's not like they're completely impotent, but you just I get this sense that the momentum is slightly shifting towards, or it's not, it's just slightly shifting towards the Ukrainians consistently, so that before it's like lobster boiling in a pot, before you know it, that lobster is dead and everyone's having a nice lobster meal. So are we going to get to a point where the Russians are eventually like, oh no, it turns out we're screwed? Oh bugger. Are we going to get to that kind of point? I don't know. I mean, that's obviously I'm pro-Ukrainian, and that's what I hope. But I do get a sense that things are going in the Ukrainians' favour, right? And then you add to that Prigozhin dying yesterday, and things are interesting. The governor of the Kaluga region, Vladislav Shepsha, so we're talking now about distance strikes. Kind of Crimea was part of that. Wrote that this afternoon, yesterday, 2 drones were allegedly destroyed on the territory of Kurovsky district near Shaikovka, which hosts an airbase. So then going back to this, they should be hitting air bases. They are hitting air bases. He said there were no casualties and no damage to the infrastructure. You can't tell that that's correct. Now, Ukrainian air defense has shot down 14 Russian Kinzhal air defense missiles, apparently. This was reported by the Strategic Communications Department of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. That's not 14 yesterday or whatever. I think this is 14 of them in total. Now, remember, these are hypersonic missiles that are supposedly unable to be shot down. And then it appears that everyone that's been shot at Kiev has been shot down. But it's not that Patriot is the only missile system that can shoot them down. In fact, the Kinzhal, this is coming from the Armed Forces Stratcom. In fact, the Kinzhal cannot overcome anti-air missile systems that entered service before the collapse of the USSR. In other words, there are Soviet-era missile systems, apparently, according to Ukrainians, that can take out Kinzhal. Whether, I don't know if S-300s qualify as Soviet, I think they probably do. So it would be interesting if S-300s can take out Kinzhal missiles. It's just really significant. Okay. Russia has attacked Dnipro last night, wounding 7 civilians. According to the Oblast head, 1 missile was down, but others hit transport infrastructure and damaged other buildings, including a bank, a gas station, a hotel, and an agricultural company and shops. So there is at least a lot of civilian infrastructure and commercial infrastructure taken out by these strikes. This is not unusual for the area. Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia are consistently hit by particularly S-300 missiles used in their surface-to-surface mode, their secondary mode. They become more inaccurate in doing so, but I'm not even sure they ever particularly fire them at military targets. It seems that those cities are just hit consistently, and they are civilian targets that are hit. Right. J dams are being used, like I said the other day, more and more. This is Novopokrovka. This is south of Robotna. Now, this seems to be, Robotna has been liberated. There's a flag flying on top of one of the main buildings of Robotna. They are now moving on further south of Robotna to Novopokrovka. Here we have JDAMs being used to take out an entire structure. These are super useful because they have big explosions and they will take out. I mean, look at, if you look at that, I get restricted when I show you stuff like this, but you know, look at the dam. That whole building is now in trouble. I mean, certainly one of the wings will be game over, but that these JDAMs are super useful, and it's really good to see them being used with greater frequency by the Ukrainians. Right, let's move on to other bits and pieces. Okay, Prigozhin. Again, I've done a whole video on him. Now, my conclusion last night was I don't think it is Putin, but I'm kind of 50-50. I'm like, nah, all of these options are plausible. Well, I didn't think it's Putin because it didn't make that much sense with loads of other ideas. Like, I think Wagner and Prigozhin still have a load of utility for Putin. I think they're needed in Africa. And this signals the end of Wagner. Wagner were pretty much ended by Bakhmut. Bakhmut was successful, as I've said before, for the Ukrainians for a number of reasons, fixing and attriting Russian troops. But being the end of Wagner, that was the end of Wagner. They pulled out there. We've so apparently we have scare quotes won Bakhmut, says Wagner. We took Bakhmut. Yeah, it took you almost a year. You didn't quite take it all, by the way, and you culminated. That was the end of you, and then you went back for R&R, and then that was it. You're gone from Ukraine. Then you had the mutiny. Then uh, it looked like Wagner was just going to be dealing with Africa and places around the world, which is really useful and important for Russia in hard power and soft power, in votes in the UN, Mali voting in the UN for Russia, and all this kind of stuff. So, being involved in Niger and the coup there, perhaps, and this is really important for Russia in terms of hard power, soft power, and economics, finances, whatever, money, natural resources, raw materials, and so on and so forth. And my idea was like, you know, if Putin wanted to kill Prigozhin, he would have done it earlier and would have put him in prison. Really easy to do so. And this then incurs the wrath of Wagner against the Kremlin and against Putin. So I just think this is kind of like a weird decision for Putin. But however, I've had a night to think about it, and I think Putin had to have somehow been behind it. It may have been FSB that was kind of spearheading it, and Putin was like, "Yeah, okay." I think it's probably more likely that Putin was signing this off rather than going to the FSB and saying, "I want Prigozhin dead." I think the FSB have said, but whatever, really. So Putin's still involved. Um, and Wagner are weaker now. They've handed most of their big weapons back. So all the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing from Wagner channels saying we are going to go and march of justice on Moscow, I don't think they're in a position to be able to do that. I think they're pretty much screwed. Some of them in Ukraine, some of them in Belarus, some of them now in Africa, and most of their weapons are gone, etc., etc. So I don't think there's an awful lot they can do, and that could be why Putin has waited this long to get rid of Prigozhin. So Wagner's dissipated; they're weaker than they've ever been. It's killed Prigozhin, Dmitry Utkin, and their security head of security, and that is Wagner now gone. Game over. Now, so as I was saying, here's an issue for Russian kind of foreign diplomacy and strategy and whatnot, with them not being in Africa. Well, what have we been seeing recently? We've been seeing the Russian MOD produce their own private military companies like Redout and so on and so forth. Shoigu has his own. Gerasimov probably has his own. Gazprom have their own. All these private military companies are now getting sort of established enough to be able to replace Wagner in uh, in Africa and other places. And it could be just a case of going to those Wagner fighters and saying, right, you're now homeless. You can either just sign a contract with Redout and carry on doing what you're doing in Africa, or what you're going to do. Anyway, right. Tatragami says the cause of Prigozhin's plane crash remains undetermined, but there have been assertions of air defense involvement. The S-300 defense unit is located roughly 50 kilometers from the site, and it adds weight to the theory that it's not conclusive or a final proof. Based on publicly available Maxar imagery via Google Earth and confirmed by other sources, there are indeed anti-aircraft batteries in close proximity. Additionally, so on and so forth. So it could well be air defense, but and some people are claiming that there's evidence of the plane, the way that it broke up could well be air defense. People saying there are contrails of an air defense missile, and so on and so forth. But then other people saying it could be a bomb on board. And now we had sort of Western officials, anonymous officials, and whatnot saying we think it was shot down by air defense. Now saying we think it was FSB that was involved. UK defense sources tell the BBC Prigozhin's plane most likely brought down by Russia's FSB domestic intelligence agency, likely to strengthen the position of Prigozhin's enemies, Shoigu and Gerasimov. and that would more likely be a bomb on board. There were claims, I don't know if we've got it here. There were claims that it had some last minute repairs done, the plane, to it before it took off. And that is like, oh, sounds like they're putting a bomb on board type thing. Wagnerians are trying to leave Belarus because of the news about Prigozhin's death. According to the Belarusian underground, in the evening of the 23rd of August, part of the Wagner camps in Belarus were being shut down. Um, Biden has come out and said something. Part of what he said was not much in Russia happens that Putin would not be behind. So he said, he basically said, I don't know who did it, which is probably quite correct, but Putin has his finger in all the Russian pies, so he's going to have something to do with it. Conspiracy theories abound in Russia. Prigozhin's phone was reportedly found at the crash site, yet some of the bodies are too badly burned to be identified. They've now been taken for identification. Some media report a suspicious short delay for repairs prior to takeoff, so on and so forth. US journalists. Oh, no, that's something else, actually. Right. Prigozhin may be poised to take posthumous revenge on Putin. A source suggests that Prigozhin was keeping sensitive information compromised on the regime, almost certainly, which may now become public. According to Russian Telegram channel, a source says that Prigozhin, quote, Prigozhin was sure that Putin would forgive him everything and was not afraid of anything. He said he knew a lot. We'll see if anything from his archives turn up now. As for the people Prigozhin died with, they always flew in threes. Prigozhin, Utkin, and Chekalov. Chekalov was responsible for the entire rear. Utkin for the combat part, the PMC Wagner. So PMC, I think that's then done. And yeah, all the fallout from this will become, well, will hopefully produce some coherent narrative as to what took place there. Right, on a slightly different front, hackers have destroyed Russian rail services, apparently. I don't know the details of this, but it's in the Kyiv Post. Putin is not as popular as you think. Hackers have taken over the company in charge of most of the services for the Russian railway service. Things are getting complicated fast in Russia. I don't know, that's a bit of overdoing the rhetoric there, but yeah, good to see that kind of activity taking place. Anyway, that's me done. There's going to be a lot of news today. So much has happened. This is 36 minutes and it's only part one. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. Take care. Speak soon.